Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to another Reddit Stories video. And I'll keep the intro short because why not, and let's just get into it. So sit back, relax, and if you're new here, subscribe. It's the channel's goal to be at 250,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I think we can do it. So please subscribe. And alright, anyways, let's get into the first story. Someone broke into my house and tried to find me. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my house feel a little more quaint on dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I had never smelled that before around my house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I just got off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later, sure that I heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by even if I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone's screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was a 9-something, but I couldn't tell if it was an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran to my closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway, past my door, and into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside of the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone were hiding, it would be in the bedroom because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic just a foot away or so from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from about their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in my house ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, though, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over, I assume in an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped, all the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in my kitchen had been opened, and all the boxes and canned foods had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said often used to smoke meth. So I think he had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with family or friends that night and get that door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to lock the broken door and spent the next couple of hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up into the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened at that house though. I lived there for another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet, and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go to a crawl space at the back of my closet instead of the attic. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been a bit slower getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hall first. Florida woman crawled out of my hotel mirror to rob me. This past Monday, my coworkers and I returned to our hotel from a day of work out in the field. Rebecca and I walked to our rooms, and as we stood outside of our rooms, I opened mine and saw someone in the bathroom. I said, "Hello?" Nobody answered. My first instinct was that it was a cleaning lady in there for some reason. And then I saw my bag with my clothes in her hands. I said to my coworker, "There's a woman in my room." Then I asked the woman, "What are you doing with my stuff?" It gets a little fuzzy here because I can't remember everything I said and what she said, but she kept mumbling about her key still worked. How it still worked and that's how she got in. I was in shock and she was obviously very flustered having been caught mid-robbery. She dropped my bags and fumbled around with her purse in a white plastic bag. By this time my coworker was behind me watching all the insanity unfold. This woman was scrambling and walking towards the door and I said, "What's in the bag?" Thinking it was probably my stuff, and then she said, No, it's just my things, I'll show you." And so she did. I looked and I didn't see anything of mine, and so since I'm obviously in shock at this time, I let her leave. I went into my room and it's been ransacked. I did a quick little look around to see if anything had been taken. All of my electronics were still there. Then I went into the bathroom and saw my underwear, my bikini, and my clothes shoved into my own bags randomly. Even my passport was shoved in there. Then I looked on the counter and I saw that she got into my medication. I'm not sure what was going through my head at the moment other than I wanted it back. So I ran out of the door to go find her. I ran to the laundry room downstairs and out to the sides of the hotel and I didn't see her. I realized I was never going to find her, so my coworker and I went to the lobby to tell them what happened, and then we called the police. We went back up to my room to wait, and I noticed that there is a metal bat on my bed, a little larger than one of those novelty wooden bats that you can get at a baseball game, but there's also a flashlight on the end. She must have left it behind in a hurry. She also left behind a necklace that must have fallen out of her bag when she was scrambling with mine. I was mostly freaking out at this point because I thought that she'd gotten away with my medication that I need. The police got there and took our statement and looked around the room as well. One thing that I noticed was that there were bits of drywall in the sink, and I pointed it out to the cops, but none of us really knew where it came from. We started looking at the door and the windows to see if she pried her way in somehow, but there was nothing. So we kind of just went with the idea that she had a spare key or something, even though that the hotel front desk was adamant that there's no way that could be. The officer that came brought 2 more officers as backup because they thought the woman might still be in the vicinity. But after our statements were taken, there was nothing else they could really do, so they left. I sat down to finally make some phone calls to people, and as I'm on the phone, I'm thinking about the drywall in the sink, and it still didn't make sense to me. So I'm on the phone and looking at the drywall and the mirror on the wall right above it. And then it hit me. I got my coworker and asked her to help me pull at this mirror on the wall, and we took down the mirror, and there's a hole there just big enough for a desperate junkie to squeeze through. I asked Brian and Rebecca if I should call the cops again to let them know that I found this, and my boss said, "There's still 2 cop cars in the parking lot." So I went down to tell them, and the female cop kind of rolled her eyes, but the young guy said, "I'll come check it out." They both came back up, looked in the hole, and found a pillow, blankets, cigarettes, clothes, toothbrushes. This woman had been living in the wall behind my mirror for God knows how long. She had access to me and my room at all times. I know it might be hard to picture. There was a crawl space about 2 feet wide in between the 2 rows of rooms. One of the officers called the original officer to come back and take pictures of this. She explained to him what's going on, and all I hear over the radio is "no fucking way." He comes back, takes pictures, and is just as mind blown as the rest of us. Obviously, we packed up and left immediately. What's even crazier is she had probably been there a long time. The last time we stayed at this hotel, I would randomly smell cigarette smoke, and I assumed someone was smoking in their bathroom and it was just traveling through the vents. But nope, a junkie was smoking just on the other side of my mirror. She had access to other rooms too. The holes in the walls were from a renovation and the hotel hadn't properly patched and just covered up with mirrors. She could have been hanging out in people's rooms when they were gone. Anyways, this was insane, and I'm taking a little time off. I woke up to a hooded figure standing above me. This occurred in 2017 and is 100% true. Due to a multitude of factors, including a recent death of a close friend, I was unbearably depressed at this time in my life. For that reason, my family flew across the country to visit me in LA, where I live. We thought it would be nice to visit Catalina Island. When we arrived, it became apparent to us that it was the off-season. It was late November, the weather was cold, and as a result, the island was nearly empty, besides locals and a few straggling tourists such as ourselves. Our first priority was to ditch our luggage so we could explore the island. So we immediately checked into our motel, though that word hardly does the place justice. I call it a motel because all of the doors of the rooms exited to the outside. But in actuality, our room was one of 20 to 30 quaint guest house looking buildings arranged in a sort of horseshoe shape around a walkway, with rooms on either side of the path. The entrance to the motel was essentially one of the points on the horseshoe, and if you walked dead straight, you'd reach the room we were given, essentially on the corner before you have to go right to go further into the horseshoe. So from our room, one path led back to the street, the other further into the secluded maze of rooms. Stay with me. After a day of exploring and having just finished dinner, it was time for the cold, dark walk back to the room. Catalina Island is a decent distance from the mainland, and let me just say, it gets dark. Similarly dark was my headspace after dinner conversation took a left-hand turn and my overwhelming depression got the best of me. I pulled my black hoodie tighter over my freezing ears and walked ahead of my parents to the hotel room, telling them I just needed to go to sleep. And I did immediately. Depression sometimes makes that easy. I was already losing consciousness as they entered after me, drifting off without so much as a good night. I then woke up to my mom saying my name, a harsh whisper. The room had 2 beds, my parents' bed, closer to the door, and mine, further in the room. My mom's voice cut through the sounds again. She sounded concerned for me. I didn't blame her, considering my mental state at the time. Groggy, I rolled over. "What?" I asked. As my eyes adjusted to the dim moonlight coming in through the curtains, I saw her face turn towards me. She was surprised to see me in my bed. Her eyes got wide. If I'm in my bed, who was she talking to? We both looked back to where she was previously looking to see a hooded figure in all black standing over their bed. I know this is Let's Not Meet, and you are reading this knowing a creepy thing is going to happen. I mean, it's in the title, but understand how horrifically startling it is to be on an island in the middle of the ocean and wake up to see a hooded stranger looming above you. This moment seemed to last forever. Life isn't like movies, where characters unleash a blood-curdling scream. Sometimes the only thing that comes out is a sometimes panicked and guttural. My mom's words became low and severe as she said my dad's name in a dire voice I've never heard her use before. Then the hooded figure did something so bizarre and unsettling. It didn't advance towards us, but instead crouched in the corner near where it stood. The way it crouched was so absolutely unexpected, even in regards to this already unexpected situation, that it terrified me. It seemed animalistic. I knew 2 things. The hooded figure had been standing over us sleeping, and it's not acting in any sort of way that I can understand, as opposed to the infinite moment of this figure standing over us a mere seconds ago. The series of events that unfolded when my hulking, ex-military dad woke up happened in an instant. Suddenly, we were out the door, not knowing which way the intruder went. My mom was screaming, "Get him! Get him!" My dad was running down one path of the horseshoe further into the hotel, shouting through sheer adrenaline, "I'm gonna fucking kill you." I ran down the other path towards the street. When I got there, not a sign of the intruder, but it became suspiciously quiet behind me. I ran back to the room to find my dad quietly walking back, his head low. He gets really close to me and I hear him say, "It's a fucking kid." The explanation? Some young teen, tall and lanky, as I am in my 20s, wearing all black including a black hoodie, went into the wrong room. Our room. The one time my parents just so happened to forget to lock the door. My mom woke up when he entered, and seeing a tall person in a black hoodie, thought he was me, assumedly leaving the room in a depressive episode. And when the hooded figure crouched, that was him realized his mistake and panicking. He was scared of us. As I got back to the room, my mom walked out and hugs the kid, who was now crying his eyes out. I would be too if a massive ex-soldier was sprinting after me with murder in his eyes. So to the now traumatized kid from Catalina Island, I look forward to reading your Let's Not Meet of the same event from your perspective. And before we get into this story, the user who wrote this story split it into 4 different parts. So I'm just gonna read them all 4 parts kind of at one time. I will mention when part 2 is happening, but that just is the reason I say part 2, part 3, or part 4. So this is split into 4 parts. And so yeah, anyways, let's get into it. I'm taking care of a local farm for a few weeks. They left me a strange set of rules. A few miles north of me, there's a little family-owned farm. The family takes a vacation in July though, and they posted a job listing for a caretaker. My job would include feeding the animals, making sure the irrigation is working, and harvesting some crops. It's a small operation, so it's not fields and fields of stuff, plus they are offering $2,000. At that time, that seemed like an amazing deal. Now, I'm not so sure. See, the Gershons left me detailed instructions in the envelope, along with half of the stipend. And as I sat down and read it, I realized that it sounded a little strange. Dear Emily, thank you for taking care of our farm. To ensure your safety and happiness and the animals, we've included a list of instructions and tasks. Number 1, please feed the goats and the chickens at 6 a.m. sharp. They get pretty cranky if it's not on time. 2, you will need to prune off the flora canes in the raspberry patch. To do this, cut the canes or branches that are woody and have already fruited. Wear thick gloves because there are thorns. If you do get cut, immediately head inside and call Dr. Livesley to make sure your wound is not infected. 3, the sunflower field is easy to maintain and brings beauty to our farm. However, if you see a sunflower that isn't facing the same direction as the others, immediately head inside. Do not return to the sunflower field until the following day. Number 4. The farm is, as you know, surrounded by forest. Sometimes we get coyotes, foxes, or other wild animals prowling around the grounds at night. Don't worry, the animal pens are completely secure and there's no need to check on the animals if you hear anything at night. In fact, we recommend you do not leave the farmhouse between sunset and sunrise. Number 5. Do not enter the corn maze. Even if you hear noises coming from the maze that sound like a child crying, do not enter. The corn maze is not open to visitors yet. It's most likely the bobcats in the woods. Number 6. Do not be alarmed if you see the goats awake in the middle of the night. They are semi-nocturnal and often wake up to roam, graze, or use the bathroom. Number 7. You may help yourself to any of the fruits or vegetables you harvest. However, do not eat the apples from the northwest corner of the orchard. Number 8. We no longer use scarecrows. If you see one, please return to the house. Lock all the doors and close all the curtains. Stay inside until the following morning. Number 9. Make sure to always stock the farm stand twice a day. In the morning and again in the afternoon. At night, Take all unsold produce inside and store it inside the refrigerator. Number 10. We do not own any pigs. Thank you so very much, Emily. The Gershons. I glanced out the window. The sun was hanging low over the trees, orange rays filtering through the forest. Damn it. If I'm not supposed to be out after dark because of the wolves or whatever, I better get cracking. I walked over to the goats first. They huddled close to me as I filled their food bins, staring at me with their weird slit pupils. I tried to get it done as quickly as possible. Goats, honestly, freaked me out a bit. As I hurried away, one of the black and white fur pushed its little face through the fence. "Ma!" it bleated, staring at me. The chickens were more skeptical of me, staring at me and letting out a long "box" as they bobbed their head. As soon as they realized I had food, though, they came over and pecked the ground. They were pretty cute, actually. I locked the gate and turned back towards the house. I froze. Across the field from me stood the field of sunflowers, bright golden petals and dark centers, swaying slightly in the wind. But while all of them tilted away from me, facing the dying sun, one of them, near the edge of the field, was instead facing me. I stared at its pitch black center. Didn't the note say something about that? Go inside. If one of the sunflowers is pointing a different way? I locked up the chicken gate, then I strode across the grass towards the old farmhouse, still carrying the bag of chicken feed. I was halfway to the house when I turned around again. I wish I hadn't. The sunflower was still facing me, even though, based on my path, it shouldn't have been. I picked up my pace towards the house. Oh, come on, what do you think it's going to do? That sunflower is going to chase after you and murder you? My brain knew it was stupid, but there was something instinctual, a gut feeling, that forced my legs to pump harder. I didn't even bother dropping the feed off at the shed. I raced into the house and locked all the doors. Phew. Safe. I took a final glance out at the sunflower. Then I went inside to the tiny kitchen and started some water boiling for pasta. By the time I was sitting down to eat, I was shaking my head. So stupid. Afraid of a sunflower? Something woke me up in the middle of the night. I sat up, my neck aching from the crappy pillow they'd left for me. I looked around my tiny bedroom, but nothing seemed amiss. Well, of course there were things amiss, like the peeling paint and the light bulb that flickered in the clogged toilet, but nothing different. I yawned and checked my phone. 3:12 a.m. Sighing, I settled back to sleep. But before I drifted off, I heard it. A small, high-pitched noise coming from outside. I slowly forced myself out of bed and walked over to the window. Underneath me, the farm sprawled out into the darkness, but it was distorted in the old glass, shapes and colors bleeding into each other like running paint. I flipped my window lock and pushed it open, the wood squeaking loudly in my ears. I listened. Silence. Then, help me. A voice, a child's voice, coming from the direction of the cornfield. That's no fucking bobcat. My blood ran cold. I stared out into the darkness at the cornfield on the edge of the woods, hoping that it was just some lingering dream or something. But as I stood there, the cool summer breeze wafting into the room, I heard it again. Please, help me. The voice wavered, as if the child was crying. I squinted into the darkness, staring at the cornfield. I have to go out there. I remembered the Genshin's rule, but there was no way this was an animal. Hey, I'm coming, don't worry, I shouted out the window. Silence. And then a rustling sound. I squinted at the cornfield, and I could see the stalks moving, as something moved within them. Stay where you are, I shouted in the darkness. I'm coming to get you. The corn stalks continued to move, and every muscle in my body froze. The amount of corn moving, there was no way it was just a small child in there. The corn was swaying, dancing, rolling in an area maybe 10 feet across, and it was making its way towards the edge of the field. Rapidly. I shut the window, then I closed the blinds. My heart started hammering in my chest. I raced downstairs and checked the locks, and then, finally, when I was sure I was safe, I called the police. But they wouldn't even come out. There are no missing children in the area, and what you saw was most likely a bear, they explained calmly. I think they must know about the Genshin's farm. So now I lie here, in my bed, listening the snaps and rustles of the corn stalks. There's a chair wedged underneath my doorknob. I've triple checked all the locks, and all I can do is wait for dawn. Part 2. 6 a.m. came all too early. The alarm blared in my ears and I found myself out of bed groaning. The sun had just crested over the hill and the sky was lit with the pale gray of dawn. I could hear the rooster crowing already. I looked out of the window, scanned the farm, but everything looked normal. All of the sunflowers were facing halfway towards me in direction of the rising sun. The cornfield was still. The chickens were milling around the coop, pecking the ground. I went downstairs, grabbed the bag of feed I'd never put away, and went out to the coop. The chickens were probably the only part of the farm I liked. The fat little hens ran towards me as I poured the food onto the ground, making happy noises as they pecked it up. I locked the gate and started over the hill, towards the shed, to get the goat feed. That's when I heard it. Oink! I stopped in my tracks. The Gershon's note said they didn't own any pigs. Oink! The note didn't say anything about avoiding the pigs though, so I was free to go fetch the goat feed, right? I started walking again up the hill. Oink! And that's when I realized there was something off about the sound. It almost sounded human, like a person saying oink, instead of an actual animal sound. For a second, I had a weird mental image of a naked man covered in his own filth, crouching on the ground saying oink over and over again. Oink. I shook my head and continued up the hill. And when I got to the top, I saw the source of the noise. A fat, pink pig standing in the grass. I let out a breath of relief. See, it's just an ordinary pig. I passed the pig, ignoring it completely, and opened the shed. Put the chicken feed back, pulled out of the goat feed, started back up the hill. I stopped dead as my eyes fell on the pig. Its face. It almost looked human. Its fleshy, pink snout was shorter than it should be. Its curled little ears sat low and flat on its head, and its eyes, they weren't round and beady, but almond-shaped, like a person's, with dark pupils that stared up at me in a way that suggested intelligence. The feed bag fell out of my hands. I stumbled back, but the pig didn't advance. It just stared at me with its human eyes. I backed away, keeping my eyes on it, slowly walked around it so that I was going back towards the house. When I got over the hill and that horrible little face was finally out of my sight, I whipped around it and broke into a run. What the fuck was that? I panted to myself as I locked the front door behind me. Not knowing what else to do, I pulled out my phone and called the police. But when they picked up, I wasn't sure what to say. I started. I found a pig that doesn't look like a pig on the farm, the Gershon's farm. Did you touch the pig? The officer cut in. What? Did you have any contact with the pig? Any at all? No. Good. We'll send an officer out to deal with it. 15 minutes later, I saw a police car pull up the driveway. They asked me where I'd seen it, then told me to stay inside. I went over to the window and watched them walk up the hill, then disappear. A minute passed. Then a shrill squeal erupted in the silence. 5 minutes later, the officers reappeared, carrying a large black plastic bag that swung with each step. Hey, I called out as they headed for the cruiser. What was that thing? The officers glanced at each other. Rabies, the female officer said, while the male stuffed the bag into his back seat. A bunch of rabid pigs have been showing up in this area. Gonna send it off to get tested. Good thing you didn't touch it. Before I could ask any more questions, she hopped into the driver's side, and they were gone. I stared out the window, utterly perplexed. Why didn't the Gershons tell me to stay away from the pigs? After the debacle with the pig, I decided to take it easy. I made a wholesome breakfast, read a few chapters of the thriller I was working on, and called my boyfriend. Around 11 a.m. though, I realized I'd forgotten to stock the farm stand. It was still technically morning, so I ran out into the field, filled my bag with zucchini and tomatoes, and ran down the driveway as fast as I could without spilling any of the produce. But as the little farm stand came into view, I saw that there was already somebody waiting. I checked my watch. 11:49 a.m. I'm so sorry, I breathed as I spread the produce out on the wooden table. I was supposed to get this out earlier, but there was a pig and something made me stop rambling. I glanced up. to see that the person standing there was a little odd. He was an old man, probably about 6 feet tall, and very thin. He wore surprisingly a crisp black suit and an old-timey bowler hat in the sweltering heat. He was smiling at me, but his teeth were deeply yellow and crooked, and his eyes were sunken back into his skull. Nothing unnatural about him, just a slightly creepy-looking old guy. But in a way, he reminded me of the creepy dudes from that one Buffy the Vampire episode where they take away everyone's voices. "So, what are you looking for today?" I asked, when he didn't move to take any of the produce. "The Gershons aren't here?" I shook my head. "Won't be back for 2 weeks. He said, thoughtfully. "They didn't tell me they were leaving." "Oh, you know them?" He let out a small chuckle. "You could say that." I waited for him to either take produce or leave, but he didn't do either. He just stood there, looking at me. The way his blue eyes cut into mine made a chill run down my spine. It wasn't a predatory or sexual stare. It felt more like he was examining me, studying me, trying to read every tilt of my head and blink of my eyes. It made me extremely uncomfortable. "So, are you interested in any of this? The tomatoes look really good today," I said, trying not to sound nervous. "Or if you're looking for something else, I can go pick it for you. Only the Gershons can provide what I'm looking for." "Okay, well, I'm going back up to the farm. If you change your mind, the prices are listed on the whiteboard and you could just leave the money in the box." I shot him a fake smile, turned around and headed up the hill as quickly as I could without seeming weird. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Emily?" I never told him my name. The smartest thing would have been to run, but instead I turned around. He wasn't chasing me. He was still standing at the farm stand, 10 yards away from me. "I wouldn't trust the Gershons if I were you," he called out. Then he turned on his heel and strode away. As I watched him go, I realized there wasn't any car parked at the bottom of the driveway. He just turned onto the old country road and walked away. I watched him until he rounded the bend and disappeared from sight. I retreated into the house, checked all the locks, and decided I would spend the rest of the day inside, at least until it was time to feed the animals and stock the farm stand again. Part 3. When I fed the goats that evening, they still seemed mad at me from the morning. With all the pig business, I hadn't gotten their morning meal to them until nearly 10 a.m., and as I entered the pen, they eyed me warily. "Ma," a brown one bleated, with a look of betrayal in its slit pupil eyes. My last task of the day was picking up the unsold produce. I hurried down the driveway, garden bag in my arms, an audiobook playing through my earbuds. The sun hung low in the sky, casting shadows that stretched across the driveway before me. The sun wasn't setting yet. That wouldn't be for another hour, but it still made me nervous. Most of the produce was gone, but I grabbed the 3 remaining zucchini and put them in the bag. Then I turned around and hurried back up the hill as fast as I could. But when I crested the hill, I saw something in the fields that made my heart stop. A scarecrow. Its arms stretched out in its sides, its head hung limply on its shoulders. I couldn't see it in detail, it was too far away, but I could just see its silhouette clearly. I immediately broke into a sprint. "Just get inside. You'll be fine." I focused on the white door. It was still so far away, but I forced myself to stare at it, to keep my eyes away from the scarecrow. Just run as fast as you can. And I made it. I slammed the door shut, drew the deadbolt, closed all the curtains, checked all the locks, and then I collapsed onto the couch and called my boyfriend, Derek. "You have to come here," I told him. "There's someone out there," and I ran inside, but I rambled on in incoherent sentences until he interrupted me. "Wait, slow down. You think there's someone out there?" "Yes." "Are you sure?" Derek was a good man, but he often thought I was being a little too paranoid, a little too scared. When I insisted I was being followed home from work, he told me it was probably nothing, and just some guy walking the same route as me. When I heard sounds in the middle of the night, he insisted it was the house settling. When I watched true crime shows and told him how we need to do X or Y so we don't fall victim to a crime like that, he'd just laugh. It wasn't intentionally mean, but in those moments it was painfully obvious he'd grown up as a man, with little to be afraid of in his world. Yes, I'm sure. They said the farm doesn't use scarecrows, and there's a fucking scarecrow standing on the hill, watching me. I heard a loud sigh on the other end. Are you saying you don't believe me? I didn't say anything, he said calmly. You sighed. Okay, sorry, this sounds really... He trailed off. Never mind. Please, just come over here. I'll explain everything. Why don't you come over here? Because if I go outside, the scarecrow will get me. Silence. And then I realized that sentence did sound pretty unhinged on its own. Listen, there's been a bunch of really weird stuff happening on this farm. And then I launched into an explanation of everything. The list of rules, the sunflowers, the cornfield, even the pig man. Why didn't you tell me all this earlier, he asked, when I'd finished. Because you wouldn't believe me. You still don't. I'm trying to. This sounds like a ghost story type stuff, you know? Another sigh. But look, I can tell you're really upset. I'm coming over, okay? I'm leaving right now. Be there in half hour. I ended the call and stared at the curtains. For a minute, I was tempted to part them, to make sure the scarecrow hadn't gotten closer, but I wasn't going to disobey the rules. When Derek arrived, I took every precaution to get him inside safely. I told him to park as close to the house as possible, look around for scarecrows, and then run as fast as he could. As soon as he was inside safely, my fear melted away. We put on a movie, had some good laughs, and then went to bed. But around 2 a.m., something woke me with a start. And when I sat up, I realized Derek was gone. Derek? I called out, walking into the hallway. Where are you? When he didn't reply, I walked downstairs. I found him standing in front of the window, peering outside. Hey, I hissed. You're not supposed to look outside. Shh. There's someone out there. My blood ran cold. I joined him at the window and scanned the fields. I don't see anybody. No, there was definitely someone out there. His fingers inched towards his belt, and my heart plummeted when I saw the shiny black metal sticking out of his pocket. You brought your gun? You said you were scared, he whispered back. You said someone was out there. I didn't really believe you, but now I do. Aren't you glad I brought it? No, I never want to be near that damn thing. Okay, we can have some stupid debate about gun rights later. Right now, there's someone out there, and if we just go back to sleep, we might not wake up in the morning. Derek. I'm just telling it like it is. I crossed my arms and stared out into the field with him. And then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it. A shadowy figure, walking along the edge of the sunflower field. Derek didn't waste any time. He unbolted the door and swung it open. Hey, you! Get off our property! I've got a gun. The figure stopped, paused, and then sidestepped into the sunflowers. Before I could stop him, Derek ran out of the house. Derek, I shouted. But he didn't stop. I paused at the threshold, and then I sprinted out after him. Come back! Fuck. He was running straight for the sunflower field. Don't go in there! He probably wouldn't have ever stopped, but when he got to the border, I screamed bloody murder at him, and he stopped for a moment. You can't go in there, I panted, grabbing his arm. The sunflowers. Yeah, you told me. They're evil or watch you or something. I think I can handle myself. He gestured to his gun. And if I don't scare this fucker, he's going to come back and R-word or murder you or do whatever he came here to do. With that, he disappeared into the foliage. I stood there, panting, at the border of the field. He'll be okay, I lied to myself. He'll be okay. As the adrenaline faded, I lifted my head and scanned the flowers. They were all turned towards me. Yellow petals appeared silver in the light of the full moon. Okay, it's okay, they're all pointing the same direction. See? Wait. There was a single flower in the center of the field, turned away from me. My blood ran cold. Derek, come out of here. Silence. No pounding footsteps. No rustling. Nothing. A chill ran over my body. Please come out, I begged, staring into the shadowy darkness under the flowers. And then I heard it. Help. Derek's voice, strangled in pain. I reacted instinctively. My feet hit the dirt, and I stumbled into the darkness. Leaves brushed my body, scratched at my arms. Derek, I called. The sunflowers stretched up, 6 or 7 feet tall, their moonlit heads swaying in the breeze above me. I turned a full circle, looking in every direction for Derek. but all I saw were more stems, more leaves, more inky, black shadows. "Derek, where are you?" I stopped walking and listened, straining my ears for any sort of sound. And then, after several seconds, I heard something. A soft rustling. There was just one problem. It was coming from right above my head. I looked up. The sunflower directly above me was tilted straight down. And this close, I saw it clearly. It wasn't full of seeds. No. Where the seeds should have been, there was just an abyss of pure black. And there were things between the petals and the abyss. White, sharp things, all pointed towards the center. Teeth. I broke into a sprint with both arms and I pushed the sunflowers out of the way, forcing myself through the field. "Derek," I screamed, but all I heard was more rustling above my head, as all the sunflowers tilted towards me, as their mouths opened and rows of sharp fangs gleaming in the moonlight descended towards me. Then, something grabbed my arm. I was dragged through the fields, the foliage snapping and rustling underneath me. "Help!" I screamed, but as my legs kicked it against the dirt, I realized I was powerless, as I was dragged to my death. I was staring up at the stars. I shot up. The thing clasped around my arm wasn't a sunflower. It was a hand. Wrinkled hand. I looked up to see a bowler hat and a dark suit. The old man from the farm stand. And there, several feet away from me in the dirt, was Derek. He was breathing hard. Alive. But his right arm was covered in dark blood that spilled out into the soil. "I think it's time we had a talk," he said calmly, as he let go of my arm. Now on to part 4 and the final part of the story. "What were you thinking going into the sunflowers?" the old man asked, as he wound gauze around Derek's arm. "What were you thinking? I saw you go into the field too," he replied. "I went behind the field to hide from the crazy man with a gun. You were lurking around out here at 2 a.m. What was I supposed to think?" Derek shot back, grimacing in pain. "And you," the old man said, pointing squarely at me, "you should have known that if he couldn't kill whatever was attacking him with a gun, going in after him was an idiot move. I wanted to save him," I said, arms crossed. "Oh, so you were armed too?" "No." He shook his head. I caught the phrase "stupid kids" muttered under his breath. Then he took off his hat, set it in the middle of the table, and glanced at each of us. "I'm going to tell you what's going on here, and then I hope you can help me." Derek and I exchanged a glance. "How do I know we can trust you?" he asked. "He just saved our lives," I replied. "He was hanging around outside in the middle of the night for no good reason." "It was a good reason," the old man snapped, glaring at Derek. "And if you just listened for me for a damn minute, you'd understand." "Come on," I whispered, squeezing Derek's hand. "Okay, fine." The old man straightened himself and then began to speak. "The Gershons started this farm almost 20 years ago. They bought the plot of land from an old widow who had lived here her entire life. She didn't want to sell it, but she needed the money. Well, they drew up the contract, but at the last moment they changed the paperwork and tricked her into selling it for half the price. When she realized she'd been tricked, she cursed the land itself, but they just laughed. They didn't believe in curses or superstitions or the supernatural." The old man stopped and looked pointedly at Derek. He broke eye contact and looked at the floor. "Of course, as soon as they planted the sunflower seed, they realized the curse was very real. Eventually, they tried to sell the property, but by that time, news of the curse had spread, and they would only get a fraction of what they paid. They weren't willing to lose their money, so they kept it. And with time, they learned that if they followed certain rules and stayed careful, they could grow some crops and turn a profit. But no one is perfect. After some close calls, the Gershons decided they didn't want to risk their lives, but were perfectly fine with risking other people's lives. So they started hiring people to tend the farm. They preyed on the weak, the disadvantaged, the desperate, single mothers, undocumented immigrants, people who were new to town, who didn't yet heard of the curse, or were too desperate to care. The deal was a good one, too. A share of the crops, a place to live, and decent pay. This is where I come in. My daughter was one of these people. She was a single mother, and I was terrible." He paused and swallowed, as if swallowing emotion, but his face remained stoic. "I wouldn't let her and her son stay with me when she was evicted from her apartment. I thought it would cause too much conflict with my wife, and I was trying so hard to make it work. But now I see that none of that mattered. He sucked in his breath. A few weeks later, she was hired by the Gershons, and neither she nor my grandson were ever seen again. Derek and I sat there in stunned silence. "I'm so sorry," I finally choked out. That's horrible." "Then help me get them back," he said, a pleading look in his eye. "Get them back?" "They're not dead. You see, I recognize the voice in the cornfield. It's the voice of my grandson." Silence fell over the three of us. Derek and I looked at each other. The old man must have noticed our confusion because he continued, "The victims aren't always killed. Sometimes they're transformed. Like my daughter and grandson, in the cornfield, or the scarecrow, or the pigs." I clapped my hands over my mouth. "The pigs?" He nodded. No, I called the police when I saw one, and they came, and I think they..." Tears burned in my eyes. "I think they killed him." "I'm so sorry to hear that, but it's not your fault. The Gershons have a lot of power in this town. They have a deal with the police. Dirty cops have been known to get rid of evidence in the sunflower field." He sighed. "I've devoted the past 3 years of my life to this. I've run into every obstacle. Know everything there is to know. A lot of it I learned from the widow's children directly." "So is there a way to get them back? The people who were transformed?" I asked. "Yes. I was never able to get into the house before. The Gershons made sure of that. But now," he reached into the pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a small mesh bag. Within, among what looked like dried plant material, I could make out something long and white. A bone? This is what the widow used to create the curse. Her daughter told me it was hidden behind the medicine cabinet in the bathroom, and there it was. Using this, I should be able to reverse the curse's effects. He glanced at Derek, and then back at me. "So will you help me?" I paused, looking into the old man's blue eyes, and then I nodded. He began at dawn. The sun crested over the hill, sending long shadows of the path. The old man led us to the edge of the cornfield, which now was in the daylight. Didn't look so ominous. The stalk swayed gently in the breeze, illuminated in gold from the rising sun. "Are you ready?" he asked. Derek and I stood several feet away as he lifted the bag. He recited several sentences of Latin or some other language, something he'd memorized in his research, I assumed. He nearly shouted the last sentence, then he dumped the contents of the bag on the ground. The dried leaves scattered in the winds. The bone twirled in the air, then bounced into the dirt. For a minute, nothing happened. But then I heard it. A soft rustling from within the corn. Slowly, it grew louder and louder. I grabbed Derek's hand and squeezed it, bracing myself for some eldritch horror to come out. But it'd work. A woman walked out with the corn, tall and thin, holding hands with a smiling little boy. I watched, my eyes welting up with tears, as the woman hugged her father, then as both of them hugged the little boy. "Come on," the old man said, wiping his eyes. "It's time for you to come home." The old man started down the driveway, towards the main road, with his daughter and his grandson in his wake. Dread twisted my gut. Something felt off. He was just leaving, without looking for the others, without even a glance in our direction. I scanned the farm, but I didn't see anyone emerging, didn't hear any voices. "Hey," I called out. "What about the others?" The old man stopped and turned around. He wasn't smiling. "I'm sorry," he said. My heart sunk further. "What do you mean you're sorry?" "The curse can't be reversed," he said, his blue eyes glinting in the rising sun. "The only way to free someone from the farm is to give someone in their place." No, he doesn't mean. "I'm sorry," the old man said. He put his arm around his daughter. She looked back at us with sadness in her eyes, holding her little boy's hand, and then he continued down the driveway. "Don't walk away," I screamed. "Emily," Derek started. "Come back here, right now." "Emily." This time Derek's voice had an odd quality to it. It was muffled, raspy. I whipped around and froze. Straw was poking out of Derek's mouth. "No," I screamed, stumbling over to him, but it was too late. His skin was sickly gray. His eyes were glassy and blank, and his lips, they almost looked like they'd been drawn on with a marker. I watched in horror as the man I loved turned into a scarecrow. "Derek," I sobbed, "please." His body was still above me, arms stretched stiffly out at his sides, flannel shirt stuffed with straw, burlap head hanging limply on his shoulders. And then he moved. His head swung wildly towards me, his eyes now nothing more than buttons, fixed squarely on mine. I ran. I ran as fast as I could towards the house, but I could feel something changing inside me. Everything felt off balance. My legs felt all wrong, bending and twisting underneath me. I stumbled inside and collapsed to the floor, crying. But I knew I was changing too. For some reason, my changes are happening more slowly than Derek's. But when I looked in the mirror, I can see the changes. My nose is longer, my ears are twisted, my skin is pinker. So I tried to type this up as quickly as I could. Please, stay far away from the Gershon farm. Don't buy their stuff. Don't go to work there. Don't do anything. Run as fast as you can and never look back. I would say more, but it's getting harder to type. The space between my fingers is melting away. My hands are growing stiff. In just an hour or so, they will be hooves, and I will have no way of communicating with the outside world. So please, whatever you do, don't come to the Gershon farm. And alright, that wraps up the video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Helps out the channel a lot. And leave a comment on what you thought about the video down below. I basically read every comment, and if it's good enough, I'll respond to it. So make sure you leave a comment, and yeah, I'll try to get to you. And yeah, thank you for watching the video. It means a lot. And yeah, until next time, see ya.